The moment the judge looked at me, the gavel fell from his hand. My daughter and my son-in-law had no idea I wasn't the weak-old father they tried to label as incompetent. I struck back with every truth they feared. But what happened after that courtroom door closed shocked even me. Before I tell you the full story, do me a small favor. Tap subscribe and drop your city in the comments so I know how far the story travels. The knock on my cottage door came 3 afternoons after that disastrous family dinner, the kind that stains the soul more than the memory. I had traveled far from my old life in Ashridge, Connecticut, selling the home my late wife and I built together to move across the country and settle into a small, ivy-covered guest cottage behind my daughter's sprawling estate in Silver Canyon, California. I told myself it would keep the family close. I told myself it was what my wife, Eleanor, would have wanted. But proximity does not guarantee love. Sometimes, the closer you stand to certain people, the easier they find to pretend you're not there. Derek Wyndham, my son-in-law, dressed in a shirt too tight for his ambition, stood at my door holding a bottle of imported wine worth more than my monthly prescription bill. "For you, Mr. Rowan," he said, calling me by a version of my name he barely remembered. "Top shelf. Thought you deserved something nice." He knew full well that I couldn't drink anymore. After my bypass 4 years back, the cardiologist had shoved a list of forbidden luxuries into my hand. Wine was right at the top. Derek's gesture wasn't kindness. It was marketing, a prelude to a pitch. He stepped into the living room without waiting for an invitation. His cologne, an artificial ocean breeze pumped full of ego, hit me like a wall. "So," he began, rolling his sleeves up as if preparing for manual labor he'd never actually do, "I'm sitting on something big, massive, a resort deal in Crestwood Hills. Just need a little leverage." He used the word little the way some people use bless you, with so little sincerity you wonder why they bothered saying it. What he wanted was a $500,000 loan, using my cottage as collateral. "It's temporary. 6 months tops. 40% return," he added, the salesman gleam in his eyes sharpening. I listened, not because I cared about his pitch, but because his desperation seeped through every word like a stain. He needed money, fast and quietly. But the answer was simple. "No, Derek. My savings are for my medical bills, and, if I'm lucky, my quiet years." His expression transformed. The salesman veneer flaked away, leaving a bitter, coiled fury beneath. "Unbelievable," he snapped. "You live on our land, rent-free. We take care of you." I corrected him, calmly, too calmly for his liking. "Derek, I paid for this cottage myself. And the land beneath your home? I purchased it 12 years ago when Eleanor died. Your house sits on my soil. You lease it for $1 a year." The silence that followed was thick, furious, and heavy enough to crush small animals. Derek's jaw clicked. His eyes flickered with something dark, not embarrassment but calculation. He set the wine bottle on my coffee table hard enough to rattle a framed photo of Eleanor. "You'll regret this," he said, and stormed out. The photo wobbled before settling again. It was the last piece of peace I saw for a while. That night, I woke at 3:11 a.m., gripping my chest. The pain wasn't sharp, just deep and gripping, like an invisible hand squeezing the air from my lungs. I called my daughter, Laura Wyndham, hoping she would sound like the child I once held during thunderstorms. Instead, she answered with irritation dripping from every syllable. "Dad? Seriously? It's the middle of the night." "I'm having chest pain," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Could you drive me to urgent care? Just to be cautious." She exhaled loudly. "I have a charity meeting in the morning. Call 911 if it's really that serious. Don't scare us over nothing." And she hung up. I sat there listening to the dead tone for a long moment. I didn't call 911. I called a rideshare. A young driver with purple hair and classical music streaming through the speakers drove me to Sequoia Crescent Medical, where a nurse gave me a nitroglycerin tablet and a gentle lecture about stress. A few hours later, they discharged me with a suggestion to avoid emotional strain. Easier said than done. When the car dropped me off near the gated entry of Laura's estate, her Range Rover wasn't at home. It was parked outside a luxury spa in downtown Silver Canyon. Her charity planning brunch. She hadn't even asked if I survived the night. But shift began in me that morning, a slow, cold crystallizing. I wasn't angry. Anger requires heat. What I felt was something far more dangerous. Something that forms when a person finally sees others without the softening lens of hope. The next day, a courier delivered a heavy document envelope. No return address. No warmth. All business. Inside was a petition, a request for emergency conservatorship filed by Laura and Derek. Their claim? That I was mentally slipping, confused, paranoid, unfit to manage my own life. Attached was a so-called psychological evaluation by a Dr. Bernard Lynn. I had never met the man. The accusation didn't make my heart race. It slowed it, like gears locking into place. I walked directly to the main house. The patio doors were open. Laura lounged by the pool, wearing sunglasses that cost more than my monthly prescriptions. Derek poured himself a drink, as though court filings were casual errands. When they saw the envelope, Laura stiffened. Derek didn't. He smirked. A performer ready for Act Two. "You weren't supposed to see that yet," he said. "What is this?" I asked. "A safety net," he replied. "For you? You can't manage everything the way you used to." "You mean my money?" I said. "You're confused," he insisted. "Look at you. You're paranoid." Paranoid, because I refused a loan, because they wanted access to everything I had built, because I was old enough for them to assume I'd fall apart quietly. "I'm fine," I told them. Laura crossed her arms. "You need help, Dad. You're trying to take control of my life." "We're saving it," Derek said, the arrogance thick enough to taste. I walked away, not defeated, awakened. Back in my cottage, I opened the hidden door at the back of my closet. The door blocked by a row of unworn suits. I placed my thumb on the biometric scanner. The lock clicked open. Inside was my real workspace, my real history, my real identity. Before I became a soft-spoken widower living in a cottage, I had been someone else. Elias Rowan, the ledgerman, a forensic investigator for federal agencies. A man whose specialty was finding rot in billion-dollar structures, with nothing more than numbers and time. I retired that life when Eleanor fell sick. But that night, as the lights flickered across the screens, the man they would have never dared provoke returned to life. For the first time in 13 years, I powered up my encrypted console. They thought they were ending me. They had no idea they had just awakened a profession designed to end them instead. The judge's whisper echoed through the courtroom microphone, amplified unintentionally but unmistakably. "Rowan, that Rowan?" The entire room shifted. A courtroom changes temperature when power tilts, when the predator realizes it has mistaken itself for prey. Laura blinked fast, confusion turning to unease. Derek stiffened, eyes darting between me and the judge, as if he suddenly couldn't place the man he thought was a harmless old retiree. But Judge Harrington knew exactly who I was. He lifted his glasses, staring at me with the stunned reverence of someone who once watched a man dissect billion-dollar empires with a pen. "Court will come to order," he said, though his voice trembled slightly. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid for everyone who had dared touch me. Derek leaned toward his attorney, whispering urgently. His lawyer, an overly groomed man named Strauss, kept nodding, though the panic in his eyes betrayed him. Judge Harrington cleared his throat. "We will begin with the petitioners. Counselor Strauss, proceed." Strauss stood, straightening his tie, trying to recover his composure. "Your Honor, the petitioners Mr. and Mrs. Wyndham seek conservatorship over Mr. Rowan, citing mental decline, erratic behavior, and—" He gestured toward me with a flourish, a concerning inability to manage his affairs. Judge Harrington did not blink. His stare bored into Strauss like a drill. "You are aware of who the respondent is?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Strauss said, smiling nervously. "Mr. Rowan, retired bookkeeper." "Retired bookkeeper," the judge repeated slowly. A sound that was not quite a laugh left him, dry disbelief. "Counselor," he said, leaning forward, "do you have any idea whose finances this man once managed? whose testimony dismantled entire corporations. Strauss swallowed. I believe he managed small firm accounts. The judge slammed his palm onto the desk. Wrong. Silence collapsed over the room. Derek shifted in his seat, staring at me with a dawning horror. Harrington continued, his voice sharper now. This man was the Department of Justice's most lethal financial investigator for 20 years. They called him. He hesitated only a fraction of a second. The extractor. The courtroom froze. And for the first time since Eleanor died, I saw the man I once was reflected in someone else's eyes. Someone who remembered. Proceed. The judge said, waving a hand without taking his gaze off me. Strauss cleared his throat, rattled. Why, yes, Your Honor. The petitioners will call their expert witness, Dr. Bernard Lynn. The door to the witness room opened, and in shuffled a man whose entire posture screamed guilt wrapped in nerves. Oily hair, misbuttoned shirt, a cheap suit so rumpled it looked like someone had slept in it. Dr. Lynn took the stand with trembling hands. State your qualifications, Strauss prompted. Lynn puffed up. I hold a medical degree and specialize in cognitive evaluation. Renee rose slowly. Objection, Your Honor. On what grounds? Strauss asked irritably. On the grounds that fraud is not a specialty, Renee replied. Harrington lifted a brow. Ms. Blake, explain. Renee stepped forward, holding a sheet of paper between two fingers like it was contaminated. This, she said, is a licensing record of one Bernard Lynn. She projected it onto the courtroom screen with a flick of her wrist. A collective gasp rippled across the rows. License revoked. Permanently. Insurance fraud. Unlawful prescription distribution. No practice permitted. Lynn's face drained of all color. Strauss stammered, Your Honor, to this is there must be... Renee continued mercilessly. This man is not a doctor. He has not been a doctor for 5 years. I used to... Lynn stuttered. Used to commit crimes? Renee asked. Yes, that part is well documented. Judge Harrington leaned forward. Mr. Lynn, he said, voice low and dangerous. Did you sign an evaluation declaring Mr. Rowan mentally incompetent? Lynn swallowed hard. I did. Under whose instruction? Renee asked. Objection. Strauss shouted desperately. Overruled. The judge snapped. Lynn looked at Derek, then at Laura, then down at his hands. Mr. Wyndham, he whispered, and his wife. Laura gasped. Derek shot to his feet. Liar. But the judge raised a finger, silencing him instantly. Continue, Harrington ordered. Renee clicked her remote. A second document appeared on the screen. Bank transfer, $25,000. From Wyndham Strategic Partners to Bernard Lynn. A murmur swept through the courtroom like wind through dry grass. Lynn crumbled. I needed the money, he blurted. I was desperate. They offered cash. They said it was harmless. Just a signature. Renee's voice cut like a blade. And you never evaluated Mr. Rowan. Lynn shook his head slowly, shame dripping from every gesture. I never even met him. Judge Harrington stared at him with a disgust so intense it felt physical. Bailiff, he said, arrest this man for perjury. The cuffs clicked. The room inhaled collectively. Derivative cases, civil, criminal, financial, born from a single click of metal. Laura made a choking noise. A small, raw sound that escaped her like steam from a cracked pipe. Derek glared at her. Don't you say one word, he hissed. But she was already trembling. Renee turned her head slightly, her eyes glinting. Petitioners may call their next witness, she said, knowing exactly what she had just set on fire. Strauss didn't move. His face had the hollow, defeated look of a man realizing too late that he'd been hired to defend a sinking ship. He glanced at Derek. Derek's jaw locked. He stood. I'll testify, he said, voice hard. Laura grabbed his sleeve. Derek, don't. He shook her off with a vicious flick. He walked to the stand with bravado, only fools mistake for confidence. He was sworn in. Strauss asked the first question. Mr. Wyndham, what was your motivation in filing this petition? To protect him, Derek said. He's losing grip on reality. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's paranoid. I watched Laura flinch at the word. Paranoid? Renee repeated. Because he refused to give you money? Derek's eyes snapped to hers. That's not. You asked him for $500,000, she pressed, voice soft but lethal. I asked for an investment. You told him it was a guaranteed return. It was... Renee smiled faintly. Guaranteed. That a bold claim for a project currently $60 million over budget. The courtroom exhaled in shock. Derek's head whipped toward Strauss. What? How? Renee continued. 16 contractor liens. Delayed permits. Insolvent accounts. And this is my favorite part. Your primary lender issued a $5 million default notice 10 days ago. A pin could have dropped and echoed. Sweat beaded on Derek's forehead. That project, Renee finished, is dead. No, Derek snapped. I just need time. You needed money, Renee corrected. And Mr. Rowan refused you. So you made a plan. She stepped closer. Declare him incompetent. Seize his assets. Sell off what you could. Pour it into your collapsing resort. And hope no one looked too closely. That's not true. It is, she said softly. And you know what the most damning part is? She tapped her folder. You didn't just steal from him. She turned her gaze to Laura. You stole from her mother's foundation. Laura gasped. Her knees nearly buckled. No, she whispered. Derek said those were administrative fees. Renee clicked again. 2 checks flashed onto the screen. $150,000. $80,000. Signed, Laura Wyndham. Laura looked at her own signature, like it was a knife she didn't remember holding. I didn't know, he told me. They were... Derek seized on her panic, snarling, Shut up, Laura. But it was too late. Everything was unraveling. Students of human downfall always imagine collapse as a scream. But it isn't. It's a quiet cracking. A hairline fracture in the mask. Derek finally broke. She could have stopped me, he yelled, pointing at Laura. It's not all on me. She signed everything. She spent the money too. Don't you dare put all this on me. Laura's face twisted, grief and fury mixing in a perfect storm. How dare you, she choked. You used me. You told me. Enough, Judge Harrington thundered. He turned to me. Mr. Rowan, he said quietly, his voice stripped of ceremony. You've heard the accusations. Do you wish to respond? I stood slowly, not as a victim, but as the man they had forgotten I was. No, I said, I do not need to defend my competence. I tilted my head toward Derek. I am here to reveal his insolvency. Renee placed the blue folder in my hands. I walked toward the judge. This, I said, is a debt transfer, effective this morning. Renee turned toward Derek, her voice a soft whisper. He doesn't owe the bank anymore. She smiled faintly. He owes him. Derek looked at me, really looked, and for the first time, saw the abyss he had built beneath his own feet. Derek stared at the blue folder as if it were a live explosive. His lips parted, but no sound came out, just a faint rasp of disbelief, the sound of a man watching the ground beneath him turn to air. Judge Harrington adjusted his glasses. Mr. Rowan, he said slowly, would you clarify for the record what this document represents? Gladly, Your Honor. I passed the folder to the clerk, who handed it up to the bench. Harrington flipped through it, his brows rising higher with every page. Summit Crest Capital, he murmured. Loan transfer, lien assignments, full debt acquisition. He looked up, stunned. You purchased all of Mr. Wyndham's outstanding obligations? Yes. And this was funded through a private trust, I said, legally structured, legally executed. Harrington let out a soft, incredulous laugh. Well, he said, that is unprecedented. Laura was shaking violently now, hand clamped over her mouth, mascara streaking down like ink bleeding through wet paper. Derek surged to his feet. You can't do this, he shouted. But his voice cracked midway through the word can't, as if his throat suddenly doubted its right to speak. "Oh, I very much can," I replied calmly. "And I have—" Renee stepped forward, her tone clinical. "To summarize for the court, Mr. Wyndham's resort project is in catastrophic default. His lender, Summit Crest, executed a transfer of debt ownership this morning. All rights, liens, and claims belonging to Summit Crest now belong to Mr. Rowan. Meaning," she turned to face Derek directly, "meaning every asset you pledged as collateral now belongs to him." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Derek's lawyer looked physically ill. Laura stared at Derek as if witnessing the slow disintegration of a man she thought she knew. Judge Harrington raised a hand for silence. "Mr. Wyndham," he said, "is this true? Did you pledge personal and marital assets as collateral for this loan?" Derek ran a shaking hand through his hair. It was temporary. Just a bridge, just—" "Answer the question," the judge snapped. Derek's voice became a whisper. "Yes. And were you aware that failure to meet the capital call would trigger immediate seizure of these assets?" Derek's knees buckled. He half sat, half collapsed back into his chair. "Yes." "Did you meet the capital call?" "No." "Then," Harrington said, closing the folder with finality, "the debt and the attached assets are legally Mr. Rowan's." Laura's breath hitched audibly. Derek shot to his feet again. "That's not fair. He has money. He could have helped me. He should have. He let this happen." The judge narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Wyndham, do you understand the irony of standing in a courtroom where you attempted to strip this man of control over his own assets, while simultaneously complaining that he did not give them to you?" A ripple of dark laughter echoed through the gallery. Derek slammed a fist onto the table. "This is his fault." I stepped forward. "No," I said quietly. "This is your accounting." He glared at me with venomous desperation. "You don't get it," he snarled. "You think you're some kind of righteous old wizard. But you're nothing. I built everything. I took care of Laura. I built our life. And you—" He jabbed a finger at me, spitting each word. "You ruined it." I let him finish. Then I spoke softly, precisely the tone Eleanor always said was the most dangerous. "Derek, you ruined nothing. You simply revealed what was already broken." Laura's face crumpled, a sound like a whimper escaping her. Renee walked to the projector. "Your Honor," she said, "there's one more matter." Judge Harrington rubbed his temples. "Of course there is." Renee clicked a button. New documents appeared on the screen. Payment authorization. Eleanor Rowan Foundation. Amount, $150,000. Pay, Wyndham Strategic Partners. Signed, Laura Wyndham. Payment authorization. Eleanor Rowan Foundation. Amount, $80,000. Pay, Silver Oak Event MGMT, a shell Derek owned. Signed, Laura Wyndham. Laura made a wet choking sound. I didn't know, Derek told me. "Mrs. Wyndham," the judge interrupted gently, "are these your signatures?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was an admission carved in stone. "These funds," Renee said quietly, "were diverted from a cancer research foundation named after Mr. Rowan's late wife." Harrington closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, the softness was gone. "Mr. Wyndham," he said, "you are staring down charges of fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and perjury." Derek's mouth opened and closed like a man drowning. "And Mrs. Wyndham," the judge continued, "your signatures render you complicit, whether knowingly or through reckless disregard." Laura collapsed into her chair, hands shaking violently. The judge took a slow breath. "As for the conservatorship petition," he said, lifting the document between two fingers as though it were contaminated, "this court not only rejects it, this court is referring this entire matter to the district attorney." Strauss deflated like a punctured balloon. Derek went rigid, terror replacing every ounce of arrogance. Laura wept a thin, high, broken sound. Harrington wasn't finished. He turned to me. "Mr. Rowan," he said gravely, "you've been targeted with malicious intent, fraud, perjury, and theft. Before I make final remarks, do you have anything you wish to say?" I stepped forward. The courtroom stilled. I looked at Laura first. Her eyes, read, wide, searched mine for forgiveness. What she found instead was truth, not cruelty, not hatred. Truth. Laura, I said softly, I loved you before I knew what love was. I held you when you were 5 seconds old. She sobbed. But love without accountability, I continued, rots into permission. Then I turned to Derek. He straightened as if bracing for a blow. Derek, I said, you mistook my silence for weakness. You mistook age for fragility. You mistook kindness for surrender. I let the silence sharpen. And now, you are mistaking consequences for cruelty. Laura was now openly crying into her hands. Renee placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, a gesture of respect, not comfort. The judge spoke. This hearing is concluded. Conservatorship denied. Criminal investigations authorized. Court is adjourned. He lifted the gavel. But before it fell, he looked at me one last time. Mr. Rowan, he said quietly, if the justice system had 10 more like you, our prisons would be full and our ledgers clean. The gavel struck wood. The courtroom erupted. But Derek, he stood frozen, hands shaking, his world collapsing in slow motion. And he finally whispered, barely audible, what did you do? I looked him in the eyes and said only, I balanced the books. For a moment after the gavel struck, no one moved. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, reporters scribbling, spectators craning to catch a last look at the implosion of the Wyndham facade. But Laura, my daughter, didn't move at all. She sat hunched over, hands trembling in her lap, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Not defiant tears, not angry tears. Tears of a woman who had finally met the truth she'd been avoiding for years. Derek, on the other hand, snapped. Get up, he hissed at her, grabbing her arm with bruising force. She flinched, pulling away. Let go. Her voice was small, but not weak, shocked, fractured, but resisting him for the first time in years. He tightened his grip. I said, get up. Renee stepped between them, so fast Derek jolted backward in surprise. Touch her again, she said, voice low enough that only the three of us could hear. And the assault charge will get tacked onto your file before you leave the building. Derek released Laura instantly, not out of remorse, out of fear. Fear was the only language he had left. Laura looked at me, really looked, searching for something. Hope? Forgiveness? A lifeline? I met her gaze, steady but not cold. This was a part of justice that hurt, the part that still bled, even after the scalpel was clean. The bailiff approached Derek. Sir, please come with me. What? No, I'm not arrested. This isn't how it works. But the bailiff wasn't listening. He lifted Derek's arms and clicked the cuffs around his wrists. Derek exploded. You can't do this. You can't do this. I'll sue everyone here. I will burn this court too. Mr. Wyndham. Judge Harrington interrupted sharply, still seated. If you do not lower your voice, I will add contempt to your growing list of problems. Derek cursed, spit flying, but the bailiff dragged him forward. As he passed me, he snarled, You ruined my life, old man. I didn't flinch. I merely tilted my head. No, I said softly. I revealed it. He lunged at me. Pure instinct, pure rage, but 3 officers pinned him instantly. His shout turned into a wordless roar as they dragged him out. Laura sank deeper into her chair, her entire body shaking. Renee placed a hand on her shoulder. Mrs. Wyndham, she said carefully, you should prepare for contact from the district attorney's office. You'll want to secure counsel. Laura nodded faintly. Then she looked at me. Dad, she whispered. Please, not here. Her voice trembled with shame, raw and unfiltered. I nodded once. Not forgiveness. Not comfort. Just acknowledgement. Renee and I exited the courtroom together. The hallway outside was packed. Reporters, clerks, observers whispering as I passed. Some recognized me from old cases, ancient headlines, forgotten scandals I once unraveled stitch by stitch. Is that the Rowan? From the Halsey audit. Wasn't he the one who found the offshore Hydra accounts? I thought he was dead. Their voices drifted like wind behind me. Renee smirked faintly. You know, she murmured, I understood your reputation intellectually, but seeing Harrington react like that? Legendary. I didn't respond. My mind wasn't on the courtroom anymore. It was on my daughter, on Eleanor, on everything that had brought us here. We rode the elevator together. When the door slid open to the lobby, Laura stood there waiting, not running, not hiding, just standing, eyes red, shoulders trembling. Dad, she said softly. Renee hesitated. Do you want privacy? No, I said without turning. Stay. Laura swallowed hard. I won't explain. Then speak. She looked down, twisting her fingers. When Mom died, everything broke. I didn't know how to be without her. And you shut down. You disappeared into grief. I needed you, and you weren't there. And Derek, I asked, she whispered. At first, he filled the space that should have been yours. He filled it with lies. And I believed them, she said, voice cracking. Because believing him was easier than facing how much I missed you. Her chin quivered. I didn't know what he was doing with the foundation money. I swear I didn't. I thought they were administrative transfers. He said you approved them. You signed them, Laura. Tears spilled down her face. I know. I was stupid. I was blind. I kept trusting him because the alternative to truth meant admitting I'd married a monster. And now, I asked. She looked up at me, eyes raw, hollow, pleading. Now the truth is all I have left. For a moment, the old instinct, parental instinct, tried to rise. The instinct to shield her, to comfort her, to make the world softer. But softening the world had been the problem. Renee stepped slightly closer, ready to intervene if needed, protective without overstepping. Laura whispered, I know I can't ask for forgiveness. Not now. Maybe not ever. But please don't hate me. I don't hate you, I said. Her breath hitched. But I don't trust you, I continued. And trust must be earned. She nodded slowly, accepting the verdict like a sentence. I turned to leave. Dad, she said suddenly, is this the end? I paused. No, but it's the reckoning. She covered her face and sobbed. Renee and I walked out of the courthouse into the bright, throat-searing sunlight of noon. A different world awaited, a world where my silence was dead and my boundaries restored. That evening, the DA's office opened an investigation. By the next morning, subpoenas flew like startled birds. Derek's accounts, Laura's statements, the foundation's records, the deed to my land. Everything. And in the days that followed, the consequences unfolded swiftly, mechanically. Like dominoes clicking into the pattern, they were always meant to form. Derek was denied bail, flight risk. Laura cooperated fully, handing over emails, documents, confessions of things she had ignored because they hurt too much to acknowledge. I wasn't vindictive. I was exact. Justice is a ledger, not a wish. 3 weeks later, the foundation was audited and restored under professional oversight. Funds replenished, controls tightened, dignity restored to Eleanor's name. The mansion? Sold within a month. The cars? Repossessed. The land beneath them? Still mine. But the real reckoning, the emotional one, came quietly without fanfare. One afternoon, as I sat in the guest house sorting through Eleanor's old things, there came a gentle knock at the door. Laura stood there. No makeup, hair tied back, wearing plain clothing instead of the luxury brands Derek wrapped her in. In her hands, red, scraped, tired, she held a cardboard box. "What's that?" I asked. She swallowed hard. "My community service assignment started today," she said. "Glenbrook Senior Care Center. Dementia ward." My brows lifted slightly. They told me to bring simple comfort items. I didn't know what to choose. So I brought books, pajamas, socks. I didn't know what people needed most. Her voice cracked, but I remembered what Mom used to bring when she volunteered. My chest tightened, not with pain this time, but something slower, sadder, deeper. She looked up, eyes shining with exhaustion and humility. "I'm trying, Dad," she whispered. "I don't know if that matters." But I am. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I nodded once. A small gesture. But she exhaled like she had been underwater for years. She stepped back, giving me space, respecting it for the first time in her adult life. "I'll see you after work," she said softly. She turned to leave. I watched her go. A long road lay ahead. Maybe years. But for the first time, she was on the right one. And for the first time, I felt something I had not in a decade. Not vengeance. Not triumph. Closure. The days that followed moved in a strange, quiet rhythm, like the house exhaled after years of being held hostage by tension. The guest house, once a place of retreat and resignation, felt different now. Not triumphant, not celebratory, simply honest. A man can live decades surrounded by noise and only notice silence when it finally arrives. I spent the next week sorting through boxes from the office I once had behind locked doors, old case files, letters, artifacts from a career I never expected to revisit, names long forgotten by the public, but carved permanently into my memory. The Extractor, a title I never asked for, but one that had saved more than harmed. On the fifth morning, a gentle knock came at my door. Not sharp, not hurried, a knock of someone unsure whether they were welcome. Laura. She stood on the porch in a faded volunteer smock from Glenbrook, hair tied loosely, face without makeup. Her hands smelled faintly of antiseptic and laundry detergent, scents that never cling to someone who hasn't done the work themselves. "Hi," she said, voice faint. "Hello. I brought you something." She held out a paper bag. Inside were two simple things, a thermos of tea and a small container of lemon biscuits. Eleanor's recipe, the one she used to make when Laura was little. I looked at her. "You remembered." Her eyes filled instantly. "I never forgot," she whispered. "I just stopped deserving it." She stepped inside tentatively, scanning the room as if expecting it to reject her. She sat at the edge of the sofa, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. "How's the center?" I asked. Her eyes drifted. "Hard," she admitted. "Humbling. Heartbreaking." I nodded. "Good." She huffed a sad laugh. "That's what the supervisor said. If it's not breaking you a little, you're not doing it right." She stared at her raw, chapped hands. "I bathed a woman today. She called me her daughter. She has no idea who I am." "And how did that make you feel?" She swallowed, grateful that she thought I was someone worth loving. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Finally, she took a steadying breath. "Dad, I've been going to therapy. Court ordered. And voluntary." She looked down. I realized I spent years letting someone else define my worth. I didn't know how to stand alone. That admission, the rawness, the vulnerability, was something I had waited a decade to hear. And now, I asked softly, "Now I know I have to rebuild. From the inside out." She hesitated, then added, "And I hope, to rebuild with you in my life. If you'll have me." Her voice broke at the end. I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, not with tension but with careful deliberation. "Laura," I said finally, "trust is not a door you unlock once. It's one you build brick by brick." She nodded tearfully. "I know." But I continued, "You've placed the first brick." Her inhale was sharp, hopeful, almost childlike, a sound I thought I'd never hear again. We talked for a while. About Glenbrook, about her future, about Tyler, her son, who had been mercifully spared from the worst of the storm thanks to his boarding school schedule. She told me Tyler wanted to visit me after finals, that he wanted to learn whatever Grandpa used to do with numbers that made bad people nervous. I smiled at that. Eventually, she stood to leave. I should get back to the center. They need help with the afternoon meal rounds. "Laura," I said as she reached the door. She stopped, turning toward me with wide, hopeful eyes. "I'm proud of the work you're doing," I said. A sob escaped her throat before she covered her mouth. She nodded quickly, too overwhelmed to speak, and slipped out the door. That was the day I knew she might make it back, not to the daughter she was, but to the woman she could be. Meanwhile, Derek's world was collapsing at the pace of a detonated building. The DA, fueled by a judge's fury and a mountain of evidence, stacked charges like bricks. Wire fraud, securities fraud, embezzlement, perjury, conspiracy, and 2 counts they found after examining his resort paperwork that I hadn't even uncovered. When he tried to negotiate, the prosecutors laughed. Literally laughed. His trial lasted 6 days. His sentence was 10 years. Not in some mild facility with tennis courts and afternoon jogs. No! He was headed somewhere where the walls were older than his lies, and the bars didn't bend even for men who once thought they were kings. Laura attended none of the proceedings. She didn't need to. She was already serving her own sentence. Not punishment, but reformation. 1 month later, I stood in front of main house. Empty now. Furniture removed. Curtains drawn. Echoing rooms ready to be listed. I walked through each room slowly. The granite counters. The chandeliers. The 4-car garage. The ridiculous movie theater with reclining seats. All monuments to ego. Monuments to the illusion of invincibility. These halls had never known warmth. They were built for admiration, not love. It was fitting that they now belonged to no one. I sold the house to a developer within weeks. The proceeds went straight into 2 places, the Eleanor Rowan Foundation, and a trust locked away until Tyler's 25th birthday. The boy had potential. Intelligence sharper than his parents. A moral compass bent, but salvageable. And unlike Derek, unlike Laura in her lost years, he still had a chance. 3 months after the hearing, as I packed the last of my files into a crate, the door opened softly. Laura stood there again. But this time, she looked different. Grounded. Calmer. Standing taller. How was work? I asked. She smiled gently. One of the residents remembered my name today. That's good. It felt like progress. She hesitated. Dad, I'm moving into a small studio in Burbank. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine. I can afford it. I wanted you to know. I'm glad, I said sincerely. She stepped closer, and I wanted to ask, when I'm settled, maybe you could come by? Just for tea. Nothing big, just tea. I studied her face. Not the girl who once dismissed me at her dining table. Not the woman who signed checks blindly, but a person trying, really trying to build something real. Yes, I said quietly. I'd like that. Her smile trembled with relief. Thank you. She hugged me. Tentatively, gently, as if afraid she didn't have the right. I let her. After a moment, her arms tightened, as if remembering how it felt to be held by a father. When she pulled away, tears glimmered in her eyes. I'll see you soon, she whispered. She left, and for the first time in 10 years, when the door closed behind her, the house felt full instead of empty. That night, I stood on the small porch of the guest house, looking at the quiet expanse of land that had once held a mansion full of noise and pretense. The air was cool. The world was still. My heart steady. Justice had been done. The books were balanced. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but honestly. I whispered tonight to the woman I still felt in every quiet moment. Eleanor, it's done. The wind rustled gently, brushing past me like an old friend's hand. And for the first time since she died, I didn't feel alone. The extractor rested. The father rebuilt. The man endured. And the world, finally, felt right again. Months passed. Quietly at first, then with a rhythm that felt almost foreign after the storm. Life had a way of healing itself when no one was trying to force it back into the shape it once had. The guest house, once a sanctuary, then a war room, became something else entirely. A place of transition. My work was done. My land, the mansion, the lies, the people who built their lives atop borrowed illusions. It was all settled. But the heart is slower to settle. I found myself walking the property more. Early mornings, when the light was soft and Eleanor's favorite hummingbirds appeared. Evenings, when the sky turned the same deep orange, she always paused to admire. The land no longer carried echoes of conflict. It breathed again, and so did I. One cool October morning, As I sorted through boxes of old documents, I found something buried beneath decades of stored away life. A leather-bound journal. Eleanor's. The one she kept during her treatment. My hand stilled. I hadn't touched it since the day she died. Couldn't. Opening it back then felt like reopening the wound, while the blood was still warm. But now I felt ready. I sat in my armchair, the morning sun warm in my shoulders, and opened to the first page. Her handwriting curved across the paper with the same grace she carried in life. Nathan thinks he hides his fear well. He doesn't, but I love him for trying. A breath caught in my throat. If I don't make it, I want him to remember. Love is not measured by silence. It's measured by presence, even when presence hurts. Presence, the one thing I abandoned for too long, while drowning in what I thought was protection. I closed the journal gently, my eyes stinging, not with grief, but clarity. It was time to stop living in the storage room of my past. Time to move forward. Later that afternoon, an unexpected visitor pulled up to the gate. Tyler, 16, tall, awkward in that charming way boys are when their bodies outgrow their confidence. He jogged up the drive, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Grandpa," he called. A warmth rushed through me, fierce, immediate, the kind you don't realize you've missed until it's back. "Good to see you, son," I said, opening my arms. He hugged me hard, in the way of someone who doesn't yet know how to measure his own strength. "Mom said you might be here," he said. "I wanted to, check on you." I smiled. "You're checking on me?" He shrugged. "Well, yeah." We sat outside on the porch, the sun dipping just enough to paint the yard in gold. Tyler looked nervous. "Grandpa," he said, "Mom told me everything. About Derek, the money, the court stuff." He looked ashamed. "I didn't know. I swear. I know you didn't." We sat in silence for a moment. Then he said something that nearly broke me. "She told me you saved her. I've never seen her like this. She's different now. Better." I swallowed hard. "She saved herself, Tyler." I just refused to let her fall, without seeing the ground. He nodded thoughtfully, more maturely than most adults I knew. "I want to learn from you," he said suddenly. "Not just numbers. I mean, how to see things. Like you do." A quiet, unexpected pride rose in my chest. "I'll teach you," I said, "but understand, truth isn't always comfortable." "It's better than lies," he said firmly. And right then, I believed he could grow into the kind of man both Eleanor and I would have been proud of. That evening, after Tyler left, I walked to the main house one last time. The windows were dark, empty, echoing only with the memory of footsteps that no longer carried weight. A realtor lockbox dangled from the door handle. Inside, the remnants of a life built on excess and emptied of meaning, waited to be raised or rebuilt by someone else. I stepped inside. The silence wasn't haunted anymore. It was peaceful, a shell that had served its purpose and was finally allowed to rest. I placed my hand on the banister and whispered softly, "Goodbye." Not to the house, to the version of my life that had existed inside it. When I stepped back out and closed the door behind me, the sound was final, clean, a chapter closed. A week later, I met Laura outside her small studio apartment in Burbank. The building was modest, old stucco and sun-faded shutters. A far cry from the mansion, but more honest. She opened the door wearing a soft smile that reached her eyes, something I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. Inside, the apartment was humble but warm. A tiny kitchen, a hand-me-down sofa, a stack of library books, a small plant struggling but alive. "I made tea," she said shyly. "Mom's recipe." We sat at the tiny two-person table. She spoke about her work at Glenbrook, about the residents she cared for, about how much she'd learned from being needed rather than admired. "I used to think strength meant never needing help," she admitted. "Now I know strength is choosing to grow." She looked at me with soft, hopeful eyes. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I shook my head gently. "I didn't save you, Laura. I just stopped shielding you from the consequences." She nodded slowly, wiping away a tear. "I'm grateful for that, too. And for the first time in years, Her smile looked like the one Eleanor used to wear, a smile of sincerity, of ownership, of quiet resilience. That night, when I returned to my guest house, I found myself standing on the porch again, watching the wind ripple across the land like a soft exhale. The stars were bright, the air cool and forgiving, and in the quiet of the night, I felt Eleanor beside me, not as a wound, but as a memory that finally rested peacefully. It struck me then. Justice is not about punishment. It is about setting things right. Inside the world. Inside people. Inside ourselves. And after all these years, after silence, grief, betrayal, and truth, I was finally whole again. The extractor could retire. The father could forgive. The man could breathe. And life could begin anew. Before you go, tell me, what would you have done in my place? Share your thoughts below. And if this journey moved you, stay tuned by subscribing for more stories that dig deep into the heart.